politics and economy. When there's political stability, we can achieve economic growth and sustainability. This is why we cannot play with the role of political institutions in driving economic transformation. Welcome to Tuesday, July 7th edition of the Economy and Politics Show in this year, 2020. Second day of the week and a lot to discuss as it has to do with navigating this unprecedented pandemic and how we can achieve and foster inclusive economic growth. We'll be looking today at leadership, communication, and economic management. I know you'll be asking, how does this really play out in this time? But we need to lead this discussion and really bring insights into this very interesting topic is Professor Pat Utomi, a political economist and founder of the Centers for Value and Leadership. He's been involved also in politics. He has attempted to be president of Nigeria and even contested at the subnational state in Delta. He's here to discuss with us virtually on this topic. Good morning to you, Prof.
Good morning.
Yes.
Prof, last time we had you on this show in April, you talked about the need for a national coherent strategy that leverages our factor endowment as a country, and particularly the need for us to have more investment in entrepreneurship through our banking financial system, encouraging entrepreneurship. And today we're looking at this very interesting insights around leadership, communication, and economic management. Let's first look at how this whole easing of lockdown phase has been. What are the things you've seen that happened from our last conversation in April that interest you?
Well, a number of things are very, very important in dealing with the nature of the crisis that the whole planet has faced. One is to ensure that while you prevent people from spreading the virus, that is by social distancing and all of that, which has effects on global supply chains being disrupted, production being managed in a different way because it's challenged, and so on and so forth, you can keep economic activity high enough that people's well-being gets sustained. You see the push between lockdown, open up, because people say, look, I'm going to die anyway. If I stay at home, no food, I will die. If I go out there and contact the thing, I will die. I might as well just die trying to find food. Well, that's probably not the best way to rationalize it. What intelligent leadership does is find ways of, if you will, getting the best of two worlds. Several countries around the world have had to turn to policies that are supportive of companies that are going to be challenged. Many are going to find that global supply chain problems, the fact that markets are not open, they can't go to supermarkets and all of that, will mean they can't sell, will mean that they will have to close shop. Many major market-driven companies are folding around the world. Major brand names that we know are folding as we speak. And this is a result of what has happened. So various countries have looked for ways to stimulate and sustain those ones. Some nice moves in several countries. You see, come to the United States, you wake up and you find money credited to your account. They've worked it in different ways. You just don't credit money anyhow to people's accounts, otherwise you will have another outcome. Canada, but of course, one of the best is Germany, that has ensured that productive enterprises get enough fuel to be able to ride out this challenging time. But I don't think that any country can just do that if they don't have deep reserves that they can turn to from which to do that. You don't invent it. If you just print money for that purpose, you go the way of Zimbabwe, and you don't really want to go the way of Zimbabwe. So it takes leadership. It takes clear understanding of the dynamics of the economy. It takes previous good leadership behavior. If, for example, Nigeria had saved as well as we had done in the early Obasanjo years, it would be easier to manage this today. But what has happened in more recent time has been a profligate governance approach, which has left us with nothing that we can use to fight it.
I mean, that's nice to hear. I mean, the importance of buffers, and we'll still come to that. But in terms of leadership, communication, and economic management in this time, you agree with me that it's going to be very challenging. It's been already challenging, but it's increasingly challenging as the world even faces the initial buildup of the second wave of the pandemic. Global governments, whether it's President Trump, whether it's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, even down to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it's challenging. Originating from even China, that's President Xi Jinping, you can see how everyone is putting their heads together to see how they can address these issues. For you, what's the importance of leadership and communication in economic management in these times? Because those three, from what I see, are very critical, connecting them together.
Very central. Absolutely central. What do leaders do? We have to start with who are leaders and what do they do? In many ways, leaders are the people who can see the future more clearly. And in being able to see the future more clearly, define it in such a way that the people find reason to follow that leader towards that envisioned future. Key to getting the people to buy in and move with the leader towards that future is communication. Many times, the signaling from leadership determines economic behavior, determines whether people think, oh, this is a good time to save, or this is a good time to consume, or whatever it is that the future direction of the economy that the leaders have seen clearly suggests. In our situation, it's even a little more complex, sadly, because one of the most important things about communication is trust. If people don't trust you, they wouldn't accept what you have said on its face. The communication process involves the transfer of meaning from one person to another, or one person to groups of people, or one institution to groups. This process has interferences. The communication experts call them noise. Some of the noise is semantic. That is to say, it is not because you don't physically hear what the person is saying. You can be hearing the person very clearly, but meaning that you are taking from it is completely different. If a person is used to deceiving you, terrible has happened to you when you have come. So trust is therefore fundamental. I mean, let's take the COVID-19 management and the national committee that has these daily press conferences, briefing people. Why, with all their effort at communicating, the Nigerian people still think that there's nothing like the virus, because there is no trust, unfortunately. That you can measure the trust index in countries. Denmark, for example, is seen as a high trust country. People literally believe everything government says because government acts almost compulsively in the interest of the people.
Yeah.
In Nigeria is a very low trust country because what they have seen are politicians who exist essentially for the purpose of legal or even illegal plunder. And so they assume every time the public officials talk to them that the public officials are looking for some self-interest. You know, so being able to communicate that vision is what stimulates the regime of incentives. Economics is a science of incentives. The incentives then make people act in a particular way that produces outcomes that are, you know, salutary for the whole economy. But where there is a low trust scenario, government is not able to easily, you know, communicate those incentives, and therefore production becomes challenged. This is why leadership is critical. Leadership that is trustworthy, leadership that knows how to communicate. Because you can even be a trustworthy leadership and you don't know how to communicate. You don't communicate at all. You sit in your Aso Rock or something. There are people who can imagine all kinds of things, so they behave differently.
So Prof, what are the lessons? Because you said the trust deficit in the case of the Nigerian institutions have caused people to show this cold feet to the fact that COVID-19 is there. We had over 29,000 cases now, and yet if you go through the streets of like Lagos, you see people moving in crowds, not even following those guidelines and protocols. And the big question is, what are those nations that show those lessons of building trust in this period, balancing health and economy? I mean, we've talked about the concerns, like you said, nations are trying to ensure there's a balance between health and economy. But that whole gamut of leadership, communication, and economic management comes to the fore. Are there nations that have shown that example that we can learn from this period?
Oh, there are really examples that show us that where you can better communicate trust, better communicate in trust, the outcomes have been more salutary. One of the interesting examples actually to look at is Latin America. At first, Latin America, or some people like to say South America.
South America.
You know, South America at a point in time.
Brazil
is a classic example, you know. But compare Brazil to Uruguay.
Oh yeah, Uruguay.
Where the outcomes have been completely different.
Yes.
Because of the nature of the leadership, the trust. First is the leadership's understanding and trust in science, the communication to the people, and how the people have responded. Yeah. Whereas the president of Brazil is seen as a science doubter like Trump, you know, and he's behaved badly, communicated badly, and now it has come home to roost in terms of the consequence of Brazil. I gave Denmark earlier as an example of a high trust country. You can see how they have better managed the pandemic in a place like Denmark. I think that one of the challenges we have is to overcome this legitimacy deficit of the Nigerian political system. Because if we are honest to ourselves, let's even start with how people treat. Whereas the people on the streets who have a sense that everything is deceiving them, don't even believe that there's such a pandemic. Let's even put them aside. Let's take people like me who believe that there is a pandemic, are very worried about it. Very honestly, I take the press conferences of Boss Mustafa and Co. for a pinch of salt. I don't take it so seriously. You mentioned 59,000. I can assure you that more than 250,000 Nigerians that are infected. There is hardly enough testing to give you a number that makes any sense. The situation where the population is supposed to be mainly in the north of Nigeria and all of the infection is in Lagos area shows you that something is out of whack. It just doesn't follow the rules of statistics to start with. And we know that people in Lagos are even more likely to be knowledgeable and behave differently than people in Kano. And yet all the people in Lagos are dying. Nobody is dying. You know, the whole thing just seems like a farce. And the fact that there's a trust deficit then compounds the matter. So communication is important in these things. You've got to be able to, for a long time before they finally seem to have agreed, people like me were calling for opportunities for licensed private sector players to test. Get the lead 2 or 3 or 4 diagnostic companies.
Yes.
Assuring that they use certain kind of equipment, license them to go on. I have people who I know who have been afflicted by this thing from like 3 months ago. About 8 weeks, 9 weeks ago, they went for test in Lagos. As I speak to you, they've not received the result. So
that shows the importance of deepening innovation, like you said, private testing centers.
Very, very, very true. I know I shouldn't say this publicly, perhaps. I know some company that is involved in a diagnostic company. They went testing, invited by some company in Lagos to come and test their people. I thought they tested 120, 105 were positive.
105?
105 out of 120.
That's very interesting.
You know?
To hear, yes. But that goes to show again, like what you said, like in the US, when the Trump administration put on the Defense Product Act, where you allowed innovation, reverse engineering for production of ventilators, and then opening up the space for private testings, like you see McDonald's, you drive through, you can do your test and all that. I agree with you. It has come to that point where we scale testing, because a sample test is now about 140,000 plus, which is an improvement from the initial low rates, because the NCDC, the Nigeria Center for Disease and Control, has opened up the space for
the South Africans are testing those many people every day.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So opening up the space for deepening the testings to private sector participation is imperative, and it's not something that we can with at this point. I agree with you on that point, and there's need to strengthen the process. But Prof, I want to get, because I mean, you're among those that over the years, I mean, over 3 decades, you've been on the scene, giving insights, analysis, and even the privilege of being an advisor to late President Shehu Shagari in the Second Republic at a very young age. So I would take you on, because you talked about the issue of trust deficit in the country, political institutions. That brings to the fore the need for us to review our political economic philosophy first. What is the political philosophy of Nigeria at this point? Because I've asked your colleague.
Well,
we've tried the Republican system from the UK. We've tried the presidential system in the US. So I'd like you to tell us what really works at this point. And then in the economic philosophy part, are we at this point a social welfare state, from what you see from the APC government or Progressive Congress ruling government? What is best for us in terms of economic model? We talk a lot about China, but we know how China operates as a government and economic strategy. We talk about India, talk about Singapore. They are strong governments, strong leaders, but we not have participatory democracy. Even Rwanda, which is the template a lot of people use in Africa. So, Prof, what is that clear insight in terms of what's the best approach for us if we're going to uplift millions of people from poverty and build trust for Nigerians?
Well, I think that the starting point of this kind of conversation is and most of the saddest things about the Nigerian condition is that the Nigerian, just like we talked about science doubting leaders like Trump and the Brazilian president.
President Bolsonaro.
Yeah. We have intellect doubting political cultures. Nigeria is a classic anti-intellectual political culture.
Anti-intellectual?
Totally.
This is
and it's deliberate. And I can give you a history of how Nigeria became anti-intellectual. And it is central to why Nigeria is failing.
Okay.
You see, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, look at Nigerian political leaders. I mean, many of them were intellectuals by the standards of the time. Chief Obafemi Awolowo was an intellectual. Zeke was an intellectual. Even our Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, teacher, and all of that. Go and listen to his speeches. Great speaker. He was an intellectual in the standards of the time. But more than the fact that they were more or less intellectual, the people around them were professors. Hello, Professor Luku. Just follow them around the East. Go around. Was it Eyoita? All of these people were intellectuals. Today, if you make any statement in which you mention a book or even that sounds intelligent, they say, "My grandma will chop."
Yeah, theoretical.
You see, the people that he's too theoretical. It becomes their excuse for excluding you. So the Nigerian political class has anti-intellectualism that our political process and culture has no thinking content. It's just about plunder. What you grab, it's about sharing. Share the gala, share the booze. I like to say. So we're in a major collapse of culture, a big problem. And I have an idea, at least in my head, theoretically, that's what they say we are with your eyes, of how this problem started. When the military came into office, political parties had been dissolved, everything. The only real opposition in the country, the intellectuals. And they spoke up from the university podiums, from,
Yes.
they talk. And the military was very unhappy with these sorts of quote-unquote troublemakers. And they proceeded to find ways of decapitating the intellectual class in Nigeria. One crisis in the early 70s, the University of Lagos, professors are opposed to the Gowon administration's position. What did they do? They gave them, I think, 1 week to move out of university housing. Now, in those days, some people were really not corrupt. The teacher taught and got his decent salary, lived in university house, and was happy. You wake up one morning and you have 1 week to move out of university housing. That was when the process of leaving Nigeria started. These intellectuals,
exodus of our intellectuals.
Yeah, when they could, just left. Before you knew it, most African universities were taken up by Nigerian academics, then American ones, then all the doctors headed to Saudi Arabia, then. The military, then followed by their cronies who became the politicians that succeeded them, grew a culture of despising intellect. It's not just intellectuals, but intellect. So that the ordinary person on the streets of Nigeria now, when you talk, they say, na grandma. The threshold is so low in Nigeria that government is not about problem solving anymore. People think of government.
Sorry to continue there. Well, let's explain General Ibrahim Babangida retired, for example, who had a retinue of professors in his administration. Was it more validation or was it engagement? Because you had the likes of Professor Bolaji Akinyemi.
Babangida was
in Ghana, likes of, professors, intellectuals who, Professor Wole Soyinka at the point was involved in the road safety corps.
Yeah.
You had a lot of, Professor Aboyade, who was also involved in the economic advisory committee. So for the Babangida model, was it more of trying to get validity or trying to really get people drive policy process? Because yes, I agree with you that initially there was that anti-intellectual notion, but the model is something that we still try to understudy and understand how he got so many professors in his administration to work. Professor Babatunde Fafuma, who helped us with the 6334 education model, and even Professor Liko Yoranson Kuti, who has given us the best primary healthcare system, which rated in Africa, the Bamako Initiative, something to celebrate in terms of healthcare service.
Brilliant question, very brilliant question. One of the problems with this intellectual failure in Nigeria today is that we have not studied the Babangida administration well.
All right.
I think there are books to be written about the Babangida era. And we're not writing. General Babangida himself should actually try and write a book, but now he's getting 30 odd years about writing his own book. Every time I raise it, he says, look, you talked with me enough to write the book. Why don't you write it? But they all should write these books. But let me come back to the specific question on General Babangida was quite a phenomenon. But Babangida, in many ways, epitomized the phenomenon of what is described as the cooperative state in post-colonial Africa. Now, the cooperative state is the state which incorporates those who they think will be threats. And by incorporating them, defangs them. Now, and there's a lot of work that has been written about the cooperative state in post-colonial Africa. I think political science was significantly dominated in the 90s by writings around the cooperative state in post-colonial Africa. So you have lots of material you can read on that. But Babangida was genius. He was master of the cooperative state. And I give you one of the finest examples of this. When the NMA, Nigerian Medical Association, Nigerian Bar Association, and co. became the biggest thorn in its flesh, or the flesh of military government, there almost became a tradition that the president of the NBA would end up as Attorney General of the Federation. So NBA elections was a do or die battle because it was almost like a stepping stone to becoming Attorney General. NMA became Minister of Health as a nice gentleman who I never forget. He must be a very sad man, Dr. Emmanuel Nsan.
Yeah,
Dr. Nsan was president of the NMA.
Then became Minister of Health.
Became Minister of Health. Yes. And then they used him to crush the NMA. And then they dropped him. The day he was dropped, I was not there, but this is the story I heard. Emmanuel Nsan cried like a baby because he had burnt his bridges going up. And until today, you know, I was pro-chancellor of the university, we had provost of the College of Medicine in a conversation, in a council meeting. I gave an example of Emmanuel Nsan. And he said, look, doctors hate him till today.
No.
It's the kind of sad. And who has heard of Emmanuel Nsan is that a very sharp, bright doctor.
He's well and alive. You know,
I know that. I met his wife at the NTA
in Calabar,
some years ago.
Yeah.
So, but that is the sad thing with the tradition of the cooperative state.
Model. Okay. All right. So, Prof, when we look at this whole development, at least we've seen that the military era was part of the challenge. And so that means that we need to develop a model that is out of this military system, because our constitution still, according to a lot of analysts, reflects the military input. We need now a democratic process driven from a constitution that is people-oriented. In terms of engagements to push for a review of the constitution, fiscal, political restructuring that is for everyone's benefit, do you see that traction getting to the point where National Assembly can buy in and then we can really reset our political economic system at this stage?
There's no question that we need to do that, but I can assure you this National Assembly will not. On its national television broadcast earlier this morning, and the group that I followed was discussing the Magu challenge and corruption in Nigeria and those kinds of things. And they were basically saying, who will you take it to? Is it National Assembly that nobody trusts? I mean, the Nigerian people, I've never seen consensus in contempt as the contempt Nigerian people have for the National Assembly, because they believe the National Assembly just exists to further the nest of its members. In fact, one of the people on that show cited the example of a senator, a former AIG of police in the Senate, who got up and said, I think he overstretched it, he said there are many people in these hallowed Senate chambers who are criminals that I arrested as a police commissioner. But the person on the show said that he says all the people in the Senate were people who were criminals. No, but we have a significant number of criminals in our political process and system. But above and beyond the ones who are even real criminals, the culture of the place is one of plunder. I have run into senators who come to me on flights, at airports, in all kinds of places, and they try to tell me, look, when we got to this place, we saw some terrible practices, but it's hard for us to oppose it. They even cited some lady, some powerful lady who was there, who said she too thought, no, this is unacceptable, but she didn't know what to do without being, brought down by colleagues. Now we know what happened to Shehu Sani when he got there. He was the one who then revealed the actual revenues or incomes of senators and all of that. So we have created an opaque legislative arm that is dedicated solely to personal plunder. That kind of body cannot carry out the reform that you're talking about. We need constitutional change.
We need constitutional change that even leads to
come from a people's movement.
Yeah.
We have state capture in Nigeria. The nature of state capture makes reform impossible unless you have an extraordinary run of luck that somebody emerges as president who's willing to die to change things and says, no mass, this must stop. These are the kinds of things that happened in Malaysia with Mahathir Mohamad being thrown up. What happened in most of Southeast Asia, and I'd like to talk about that, is that Singapore had good fortune. When everything was over, literally speaking, for Singapore in 1965, it had a well-educated, thoughtful leader called Lee Kuan Yew. And after crying, Lee Kuan Yew set a course that became so successful that their neighbors had no choice. And that's why the Malaysian economist, K.S. Jomo, argues that when the West talk about Confucian philosophy and all kinds of reasons they use to justify the East Asia economic miracle, says that that's nonsense. What basically happened in Southeast Asia was a flying geese phenomenon. One took off Singapore, and their neighbors looked across the border and said, I won't be left behind. Before you knew it, they were flocking like a flock of geese, the flying geese phenomenon. It's what happened to Asia. That's why I've always prayed for Nigeria. If Nigeria could get it right, flying geese phenomenon will bring the rest of West Africa and the black man out of this horrible era in history.
Well, Nigeria is the epicenter for transformation in Africa. And Prof, as we enter the second half of the year, we need to build consensus in terms of our fiscal and monetary policy response. So in just a few minutes, can you give us 3-4 key steps that we need to see happen? Because we are seeing 3 or 4 likely scenarios, either a depression, a recession, or a lean growth, maybe 0.1%.
Well,
what are the 4 or 5 critical steps we need to take now? Because from the fiscal to monetary space, we need to see action that will impact the populace.
You know that what has happened to Nigeria, one of the things that happened to Nigeria in the last 6 or so years has been that we've lost the separation between monetary policy, fiscal policy, and all of that. Because what happened was that fiscal policy collapsed completely. We didn't have leadership in the Ministry of Finance. And the central bank became activist and became the source of fiscal and monetary policy, which should not be. This has now created so much confusion in the management of the Nigerian economy. There are many people who now think that it's the central bank governor who runs the economy, which is not and should not be the case.
Economy.
Yeah, it should basically be that he's focused on monetary policy, looking at inflation and making sure he tames it and stimulating production through money supply and all of that. But there has been complete absence of fiscal capacity, fiscal policy capacity in the broader economic team of government. And because of that, we've had an activist central bank, and this has created even more problems. Now, we've got to have to develop a clear national strategy. And you mentioned the point I made in the last visit I had with you. We need to have, in my view, a certain kind of industrial policy based on latent comparative advantage. And that fiscal policy will identify areas in which we want to dominate global value chains and literally provide incentives that will drive producers into that space, that will increase knowledge in that space, that will increase access to capital in that space, and guide with incentives and all kinds of things Nigeria to become global leaders in that space where the base of the economy is diversified away from this dependence on this notorious monoculture oil. If we can think through national policy that clearly and make sure that players are not working at cross purposes, because as I speak to you right now, I don't think I know, because I know almost all the actors. Central bank is working at parallel, sometimes at tangent to the Ministry of Agriculture, and we're trying to promote agricultural policy. at another angle, at completely different tangent with the economic advisory team and the economic team of the government. We need to have leadership. We need to have clarity, and we need to think jobs and economic growth.
Thank you very
Focus must
much.
be on production, not on sharing.
Thank you very much, Professor Pat Utomi. It's really interesting discussing with you today, getting insights on leadership, communication, and economic management. Of course, we re-emphasize the need for a national coherent strategy and the need for an industrial policy that looks at a latent comparative and competitive advantage as a nation. And of course, think jobs, because we need jobs, particularly this period of disruptions. We need jobs to uplift millions from poverty. We look forward to more interesting conversations with you as we continue to see the events unfold as it affects the political economic space. Thank you once again for the time. Professor Pat Utomi, founder, Center for Value and Leadership and the Political Economist, was right on a show virtually
to discuss leadership, communication, and economic management in this period. The show continues tomorrow, but we have by 10 a.m. the market review, where we look at developments in the financial and capital markets related to the economy. Till we come your way again, join our website www.prochange.com to watch our videos with our news reports and analysis. And don't forget, in every conversation and debate around the political economy, make it healthy. It's not to be heated, but constructive and with a lot of sense and intelligence. Thank you for watching. Have a nice time and stay safe.